Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Slate. My name is Luke, and today we are going to be talking about the subgenres of horror. Horror in itself has a lot of genres within it, but today we're going to be looking at one specific genre, the one that is most exploited. Today we are going to be talking about slasher horrors. Also, this is going to be an ongoing series here in the channel, so be sure to subscribe. And yeah, let's just get started with it. Commonly mistaken for any horror movie with murder elements in it, the slashers are a little bit more complex than that. This started all the way back in 1920s with films like 13 Women and The Terror. These films would later influence in one of the most iconic horror films of all time, Hitchcock's Psycho, released in 1960. However, Psycho was not regarded as a slasher movie. It's more like a psychological horror. There's a thin grey line there between psychological horror and slashers, and we'll get more into that in a bit, but I gotta do this whole history stuff first, so we'll finish that. I couldn't find exactly at which point slasher movies became a thing, but the furthest I could find dates all the way back to 1970 with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That movie is widely regarded as the foundation, the main building blocks of slasher movies. If Texas Chainsaw Massacre started the whole slasher movies, John Carpenter's Halloween perfected it. The movie came out in 1978, that's over 40 years ago, and it still holds up as one of the most iconic and beloved slasher movies of all time. I love it, mainly because of its score. If you know, you know. Best score in any horror movie, hands down. John Carpenter's Halloween. Halloween was made with a relatively small budget. It was made with $300,000 US and it grossed over $70 million. That's insane. Especially back then in 1978, it's probably unheard of. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, don't go point it out, but let's go with it. It was at this point that major studios knew that there was a huge market being missed within the horror genre, particularly the slasher movies. Because you could make a slasher movie with a pretty small budget and turn a huge profit, and this was something studios didn't learn yet, which we will get into, because after this they exploited the crap out of it. They milked it out so much until people got tired of it. The cashing in would start with Friday the 13th, released in 1980. This movie was made particularly based off of the success of Halloween. They saw Halloween making good money and they wanted to make something else, thus came Friday the 13th. Which wasn't that good. We made a review about this, so I'll link it down below. Check it. It's a pretty long piece, so if you have time, check it out. If you don't, well, up to you. This began the golden age of slasher movies, beginning from 1978 to 1984. The golden age era gave us iconic slasher movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Prom Night, The Hills Have Eyes. What else did it give us? It gave us quite a lot actually. Can't think of it. Check out the article, there's more there. All these iconic slasher movies follow a similar formula, which was at that time known as the slasher movie formula, whereby the main killer goes out to seek revenge on those that have wronged him or her, and this usually happens on like his death anniversary or on his birthday, or maybe he lost someone that has died, so he comes back to seek revenge on that the following year. Usually that's the thing lah. These movies feature the killer in a stalker-like persona where he doesn't go like just running to that main victim and go and stabbing the guy. I mean that does happen, but not very often. But most of the time he takes his time, he goes slowly and assesses his kills. That's why you get creative kills. Slasher movies are built around creative kills. It doesn't mean you're a sick person, it just means you like sick movies, which also makes you a sick person. I don't know. So with that golden age, it oversaturated the market because they were just pumping out slasher movies like there's no tomorrow, right? Like that's the only movie studio have been making for a long time. So it came to a point where people just got sick of it, right? Because how many slasher movies you want to watch? Like honestly, if that's the only thing coming out, there would be a point where you just get sick and tired of it, and that's what happened. And thus started the direct-to-video trend. Because since no one's gonna go to the cinemas and watch, filmmakers found this small little loophole where they can make money by making their movie straight to video. And they did that because you didn't have to go through a major studio to have your movie released on video. You could just do it by yourself. I don't know how VHS works. It's like a tape, right? Long time already. So that's what happened, and it became so popular that slasher movies became the second best selling VHS of all time. VHS or VHSs? VHS. What's the plural for VHS? I don't know. And guess what was number one? It was porn. Because why not, right? The straight to video market was very, very successful for the lesser known properties, so they found their niche there. Movies like Sleepaway Camp, Silent Night, Deadly Night, and The Slumber Party Massacre became like huge VHS hits. It's hard to say, like, can you say that 3 times? Due to slasher films being pushed to the straight to video market, major studios were having a hard time getting people to watch their movies in the cinemas because not many people were really excited to go watch a slasher movie at that point, because you could watch it from home, you could go rent it out and just come back home and watch the movie itself. It was a much easier thing to do, kind of like what Netflix is now. History kind of repeats itself. This was when major studios had to rethink their filming strategy. They had to come up with something new so that they can get people to watch their movies, because it's a business, they have to make money. If they're not making money, yeah, it's not good for anyone. So they opted to do something that, I don't know how they came up with this, and this actually happened. Someone should make a movie about this. They opted to make parodies and spoofs based on slasher movies. I know, it doesn't make sense. Why did this happen? The first one being Paramount Pictures. They made a film called April Fool's Day. I never saw the movie, I just saw the posters to it, and I read a bit about what it's about. I've seen the remake, but remakes are not usually the same. So yeah, I cannot really judge the movie in itself. I figured that it would be pretty bad because it didn't do well at the box office. People weren't seeing it, so it wasn't working, obviously. Studios also began releasing spoofs. Like they made a film called Evil Laugh and Friday the 13th Part 6, A New Beginning. That's what it's called. Yeah. Apparently Friday the 13th has been like this guinea pig where they do all kind of science experiments with it and see if it works. Like, I pity the Friday the 13th franchise. It suffered a lot. It went from being a scary movie to a test subject. Wow. However, one franchise in particular was still doing really well. That was Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street. This franchise was the most successful franchise in the late 80s. It was dominating the box office, particularly because Freddy Krueger emotes. Like, he had a personality unlike these other serial killers in this kind of movies. Like, Freddy Krueger spoke, and that, I think, played a huge factor in these films being very, very successful, because the serial killers got to talk, and when they talk, they have a sense of character to them, and people could actually relate more to Freddy Krueger. Not that you should relate to Freddy Krueger, that guy's a bad person, but it worked for the context of the film. And seeing this, guess what happened? Studios started to copy, because that's what they do. And thus came films like Child's Play, where we had Chucky as a doll that can talk, which was a similar thing. They wanted to copy the success of Freddy Krueger. Chucky is another doll that can talk, and they gave him personality. Don't fuck with the Chuck, it's his thing. And also there was another film called Candyman. Never seen Candyman. Don't plan on seeing it, he sounds like a rapper. By 1989, however, fans started to grow tired of the slasher film genre, and the entire slasher franchise went on a hiatus, so to speak. In 1996, also known as the year I was born, Wes Craven, after making so many failed attempts of reviving the slasher genre, finally pulled through. He made this small little movie. You may not have heard of it, it's not that famous. It's called Scream. Of course you've heard of it. Everyone's heard of it. This movie marked the start of a new era of slasher films. It completely revived the genre and changed slasher movies forever. Scream was made with a budget of 14 million and it grossed over 173 million. I'm telling you, man, if you want to make money in the movie industry, then make a horror movie. It's like the least amount of money but the most amount of profits. Like look at Paranormal Activity, this movie, the earlier I was saying Halloween, that these movies make a lot of money. I don't know why people are not making movies, but how do you know? The secret. Originally developed as a story, Kevin Williamson came up with the idea for Scream, but it wasn't called Scream at that time, it was called Scary Movie before he pitched it to the studios. So he developed this story into a full-fledged script over the course of 3 days. Plus, he also wrote the drafts for Scary Movie 2 and Scary Movie 3. So he wanted to go into the studios to pitch an entire franchise as he felt that it would sell better rather than selling just one movie. When Wes Craven became attached to direct Scary Movie, he knew that at this point something's gonna change for him and for the horror industry entirely. Scream changed the entire rules of the slasher films because typically you would go into a normal slasher film just for the body counts. However, with Scream, it made you care for the main protagonist in the movie, Sidney Prescott, and you journey with her and you see the entire film from her perspective. This was unlike any other movie at the time, which resulted in Scream's massive success. Scream was also a game changer in the casting department because usually in a typical slasher movie they would cast relatively new actors or even unknown actors to be in the film. However, with Scream, they made it a point to cast well-known actors to be in the film so that it would help sell the movie. Scream would go on to be a massive franchise spawning 3 sequels, and with each entry, you would get a new rule added to the rules of horror that is in the context of this film. At its time, the second entry to this franchise, Scream 2, was the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. Which is not all time, but that time, 1997. Highest rated, it's like Deadpool before that. Scream 2 also sort of gave the whole horror genre a cinematic CPR by sort of reviving it, making it back to life and gaining the interest of the horror audience once again. And so it spawned several different movies to be cash grabs. Once again, in typical studio fashion, they want to make money. So we have films like Urban Legend, Halloween, H2O, which starred Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I remember that movie, and Bride of Chucky, which were all fairly successful at the box office at that time, and thus began a new era of slasher films. And this would wrap up the late 2000s going into the early 2010s, where we would see films like The Strangers and You're Next getting massive praise from the audience as well as from the critics as well. These films got that praise because they brought something new to the table in the home invasion concept for the slasher film genre. It was being overused to a point where people couldn't take it anymore, and then these two movies came in which essentially like brought something different. In 2012, Josh Whedon made The Cabin in the Woods. The same year he made The Avengers. Although he didn't make The Cabin in the Woods, he sort of produced it and had the story for it. It was actually directed by somebody else, but he was heavily involved in this. And this movie was that movie that defined horror in the 2010s. The Cabin in the Woods poked fun at all the horror cliches, and it essentially was a self-aware movie that it knew that it was a slasher movie, but it also wanted to make fun of all of the other horror movies. It was pretty good. I love that movie. You should definitely check it out if you haven't. If you haven't, like, why? Cabin in the Woods was a huge success both commercially and also critically. People loved it, and this would lead the way into the late 2010s, which is where we're at now. We'll get to that. The downfall of slasher films began in 2013, where people essentially grew tired of the slasher genre once again, because this has been going on again and again. This happens with every genre actually, because when you exploit a certain genre by milking money out of the whole genre, eventually it comes to a point where it's just too much to handle, and people, they want more from their slasher films. There were several attempts to try and revive the whole slasher genre once again. 2013 also had Don Mancini's Curse of Chucky, which was a reboot/sequel. It was like a soft reboot of the film. It got massive praise from the fans of the Child's Play movies, but overall as a whole it didn't do anything to like affect the slasher genre. That same year, there was also a movie called Texas Chainsaw 3D. If you have watched that movie, wow, yeah, here we are at horror that happened. Texas Chainsaw 3D happened. It's bad, it's terrible. I don't understand why. It was supposed to be a sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw, the 1970 something. I don't understand, man. It's weird. And with that, there was also another film that came out that year called The Purge, which in a sense that was the biggest highlight of 2013 as far as horror is concerned. The Purge did really well at the box office. It introduced a new type of slasher film where it's now not just with one person against a group, it's everyone against everyone, so there's no protagonist, everyone's like killing each other. It's fun to watch. Like, it's not a good movie, but it's fun. And then we go on to 2014, where I think the main highlight for that year was Eli Roth's Clown, which in itself was a gorno slash torture porn slash slasher. It's not really a slasher, but it's pretty fun, and that was like the only good thing that came out of 2014 as far as slasher is concerned. In 2016, however, there was a rise in quality of the slasher genres. Filmmakers at this point, they knew people don't want to see body counts, people don't want to see the same shit that they have been seeing all this time. They want something new. And in 2016, we got films like Hush, directed by Mike Flanagan. It's really good. It tells the story of a deaf mute who is being stalked by this one guy. It's also a home invasion movie. It got massive praise because of how different it was at that time. It was a huge deal actually. It became like it gained a big following. People loved it. It did well financially. And we saw the rise of the slasher genre once again. That same year, there was another movie called Terrifier, directed by Damien Leone, which essentially became a cult classic of the 2010s. I would dare to say that this film would go on to be one of the iconic horror films down the line. Like if you go like 20-30 years down the line, this would be referenced, because this movie introduced the horror audiences to a new villain. Because we already had people like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface and all that. And those were all characters from the 80s and 70s, right? We didn't have anything original in the 2010s, and that was Terrifier, which introduced us to Art the Clown. It's pretty sick and twisted. There's a sequel that was announced yesterday at the time of recording. By the time it's out, it's probably 2-3 days already, or a week or 2 weeks. I don't know when this video is out. There is a sequel in the works and I cannot wait for that to come out. That started a new trend of slasher films. And now here we are in the late 2010s. We are almost getting into 2020, maybe the last era. And slasher films have been doing fairly well. They are not exploited as much as they were back then. It's come to a point where it's all settled down and it's coming out, but not at a rapid pace, which I think is good for this subgenre. It gives the whole genre a chance to breathe a little bit, reinvent itself and get better as time goes on. So yeah, that was it. That was everything I know about the slasher genre. I may have missed out a few points. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I have. And if you have points that you would like to add, please leave them down in the comments down below. Subscribe to our channel, like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. And yeah, we will see you next week with the next video. Follow us on all of our social media links at Dark Slate Media. And we will see you next week. And always remember, you're never alone when watching a horror movie.